Hi, I'm David Colodney, and I'm talking with poet David Kirby, who will be appearing at the Miami Book Fair next week. But we get to speak to him first, right here. His new book is called The Winter Dance Party, and it's poems from 1983 to 2023. David, welcome. It's good to talk
Thank
to you.
you. Such a pleasure to talk to you, David. How you doing today?
I'm good. It's early on a Saturday morning, but I've got coffee and should be good to go. How about you?
Got mine. It's chilly up here in Tallahassee. Brrr.
It's actually kind of cool down here as well, and I think you'll have beautiful weather for the book fair and no hurricane to worry about. Um,
Hey,
it's been a rough season.
yes, it has.
Um, so the book is called The Winter Dance Party.
Right.
Why'd you select that title?
Well, there's a poem in there called the Winter Dance Party, which so it's a very small part of a big book, and the mention of it in the poem is a very small part of a big poem. It's just a few lines, but of course, the Winter Dance Party was the tour that Buddy Holly was on when his little plane went down and killed him and J.P. Richardson, the Big
Big Bopper.
Bopper, um, and Richie Valens, the guy who sang La Bamba, all young men, all in their prime, all ready to go, ready on the cusp of everything, and there were uh, circumstances that surrounding it that were ironic as well. Waylon Jennings had a chance to fly on the plane, but he switched with somebody else who had a cold. So that meant that he took the bus, which is somebody else. If you don't have a cold, you could take the bus, and that would be less stressful on you. So he did a good thing and gave somebody else a ride on the plane who died. So it's just one of those things. It was, it happened when I was a young man and their age and looking out at life myself and trying to figure out how the world worked and realizing that it didn't or it worked in peculiar ways that however you want to put it, it wasn't a straight path to success and happiness and all the good things. So it made me about as philosophical as a 16-year-old kid could get, and I guess that kind of stuck with me. I think some of those themes run throughout the poems to this day. I mean, we you get up and you look back at the hurricane season here in Florida. You look back at the Florida State football season, which is I think we won one game, we've lost 10. You look at the recent elections and don't know what everybody's politics are like out there, but half the nation is pretty much sunk in despair, and half of those are looking at a way to make things better. So that tiny event, that tiny historical musical event, gave me a lot of things to think about that I'm still thinking about.
Hmm. I, if I remember the story correctly, I think it was Richie Valens who actually got on the plane because Jennings didn't get on it.
Could be that way. Yeah, yeah,
I think that was it, and it's just kind of it does make you think a little bit how like one small little decision
yeah.
can mean like so much. I mean, obviously, I mean, poor Richie Valens,
Right. Yeah.
who I believe was only 20, I think, or something. He was really young when that happened.
Yeah.
Um,
Every day somebody walks out of the house and says "see you later" and feeds the cat and kisses the spouse and the kids goodbye, and you never see them again. So that it's been it was always thus and always will be. And one of the things we can do is think about it and write poems about it.
mhm. It helps. At least it helps me anyway. Um, so the book is kind of a collected,
Yeah,
but kind of not.
right.
So it's like I think you gave a percentage in here somewhere. I think it was like most of the or more than half the poems like never appeared in a book before.
And
So
that's actually the case. And I'm grateful for selected poems and collected poems, but I've never wanted to do it the way most people do, which is to begin with your first book back and shortly after the Civil War ended, and then the one you wrote during World War I, and a little bit more, and then you end with a dozen uh, new poems, which is kind of a nice sampler, but I'm not sure it makes for the best reading experience. So I did a few years back published a select new and selected uh, called The House on Boulevard Street. But even there, it was largely new, and I mixed them. It was a dance remix. I didn't start or continue or proceed chronologically, and I did the same thing here because David, I'm a teacher, and my students, graduate, undergraduate, the amateurs who just walk in, the old pros who want to come back for a re-up, walk in and they say, I've been reading so and so, or should I be more experimental, or I'm obsessed with formatting, and I don't understand the prose poem and what's a high bun and all this kind of stuff, and I try to teach them everything I can and encourage them to learn from other people. But the bottom line is I say, look, write the good poem. Just write the good poem. It doesn't matter how you get to it, and you do have to learn these things. But I always quote Jimi Hendrix, who said, "Learn everything, forget it, play." You do have to learn everything, but you can't be shackled by it. So that's the way I look at individual poems. And I look at books that way too. How can I make a book that people want to pick up and look at?
I found the organization of the book really interesting because it's in nine separate sections,
Right.
and each one has a title, and each one has a great title and everything. You don't see a lot of poetry books that are in that many sections. I mean, usually it's like three or four or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
So why did you pick nine? Like, how did you
Part
come to that?
part of it was the size of the book. It's like chapters in a novel. I mean, you want to, put the book down, make a tuna sandwich, go for a walk, whatever. So I want to give the people lots of breaks. But I did for years. I was a three-section guy and pretty darn symmetrical. If I was going to if I had 30 poems, it wasn't going to be 9 and 11 and whatever's left over. It's going to be 10, 10, 10. And then the Diane Seuss was the one who changed my mind there. The poet Diane Seuss. I picked up a book of hers, and one section had 7 poems in it. One had one. And one had 13, and I went, duh. Why do we need to be symmetrical? So I kind of group them, the the way we do. I put tons of poems out on a table and
Mhm.
got rid of a bunch and made it's kind of like a kid making mud pies, just kind of moving things around until you feel good about it. So there's a sort of a rough chronology in that most of the early poems are about early experiences and continuing on into later life. But then sometimes in later life, I would have a memory of an earlier experience, and where does that one go? So it's just it's a lot of flying by the seat of your pants. But somebody once referred to it recently as a semi-collected, which I think is close enough.
I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that works.
yeah,
But it's kind of funny when you're kind of trying to put together a collection or whatnot. It's like you may not put your best poems together. You
yeah.
probably just put the ones together that tell the story you want to tell, or maybe tell the
Right.
best story, but it may not be the best poem. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, and also, not all poems are the best poems. I say in my intro that I'm glad to have Franco Harris collected poems, but I don't know how happy he would be about it. And I'm just in awe of living poets who uh, say that this book is my collected poems, and but I have to imagine that even they have a couple of stinkers there, or just ones that just don't carry the weight. And
mhm.
I wanted every poem in this book to be able to the small ones, the big ones, to kind of hold up the whole structure.
Mm. So, like at this point in your career as a poet, like why did you think this was a good time to put out a collection like this, a semi-collected?
Well, I was looking back at everything, and none of us are getting any younger here, and it just seemed like I wanted to break with the good book, good book pattern, and do something big. So I call it a milestone book because it is big and has so many poems in it. And I've got a couple of essays in there that again, they're things you don't usually see in books, but they talk about the poetry and vice versa. And but don't get any ideas, David. Don't get any ideas, you people out there, because I've got plans for two more books to come out. So there may be a son of the Winter Dance Party in 10 years. I don't know.
I definitely look forward to that. Um, you you make a couple of really good points in your introduction in this book, and one of the things you say here about the book is let's see, it is something like it's not the progress of this book is to say that it lays out not one person's life, but that person's life as a poet. How he started thinking about a poet before he ever wrote a single poem, how his understanding of the way poems work developed and expanded, and why he still thinks, as James Dickey said, poetry is just naturally the greatest goddamn thing that was ever in the whole universe,
Yeah.
which is great. Um, what, what does that quote mean to you specifically? Why did you include that quote in here?
Well, I wanted to emphasize something, and I don't know whether this comes out either in the two essays or in the book, but I want to emphasize how much emphasis I put on having the mind of a poet. And then again, this is another thing that I tell all my students. And really, the graduate students are set on a path, especially the undergraduates, and I teach a lot more of them. I say, I don't care if you write another poem when you get out of this class. I hope you do, but that's up to you. So, but I really, really, really want you to have the mind of a poet. And that means that you see the world through poetic lenses, which are the best, the most useful lenses possible. A lot of people think, poetry sort of begins in middle school where you're lamenting your lost boyfriend, or you're complaining that dad is a tyrant or something like that. And with a few changes, a lot of mature and even well published and well thought of poetry kind of continues in those veins. But to me, a poet is somebody who kind of steps back and looks at everything and figures out how to put it in a new order. I talk about um, Tennessee Williams. Talk about Tennessee Williams saying when he was 12 years old that he was looking at life and he didn't like the way it was put together. It didn't mean that he didn't like life or love life, but he just didn't. He thought he could do better. So he took the blocks and moved them around. It's kind of like a big version of an erector set or Legos. Life is a kit, and it's up to you how you put it together. And that was the thing I really wanted to emphasize. And it's what scientists do. It's what cooks do. It's what politicians do. And the ones that we know about and hear about are the people who really think the way poets do, and which is to survey everything, weigh everything, put it together the way it should be, make whatever changes you need, and make things better, see life more clearly.
Hmm. When when did you kind of realize you were thinking like a poet? Like, did you have sort of an aha moment at some point where you're like, maybe I am kind of thinking like,
Yeah.
Williams or somebody. Was there a
Good,
time when that happened?
good question, because as you know from your own experience, uh, the things that we love the most and the things that we're good at are the ones we were already doing, and then we find out that it's actually something that's been done before, and that you can learn from other people and do it in a way that's even more rewarding. So I think a lot of natural athletes start that way. They're
Mhm.
playing sandlot baseball or something, and then they parents take them to a real game, and they say, "Oh, there's something to this. Let me study this." And the next thing you know, it becomes a way of life. And we always hear about the Mozarts and people who just, or Jerry Lee Lewis at the other end of things. His father bought him a piano when he was 12 years old because he found out he had a natural talent for banging on the keys. He never took lessons, but he became Jerry Lee Lewis. I was I grew up on a farm. My parents were older. I had one older brother who had his own life, so I was out just kind of walking around and thinking my thoughts and being myself. And I, I came up with the scheme I talked about in answer to the last question about weighing life in the balance and taking it apart and putting it back together in a more satisfying way. But I didn't know I was doing that. I was just doing it, and then I went to school, read books, had great teachers. But in a direct answer to your question, David, I don't think I really formulated what I just said until I began to teach myself. And as you know, there's nothing like teaching to teach others, yeah, but to teach yourself even better.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting because it's like I think all of us who write or read or something, we kind of have this idea of ourselves, in a certain way, and I think the writing kind of helps us define
Yeah,
that and
yeah.
stuff, and I think it helps us not only look at at the world around us, but our own life and our own existence as well.
Right. Right. And you're a lucky person if you can get that overlap between how you see things and how you make your living.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. Um, if there's a particular poem in the book, would you say there's a quintessential David Kirby poem in this book that maybe would sum up your style?
There are a couple of greatest hits. There's a long poem called Borges at
Mhm.
the North Side Rotary about me, having my usual adventures. You might have noticed that everything that happens to me is an adventure. Everything is a story, and I'm often the hero of it, not entirely coincidentally. Uh,
Hmm.
so that's one. I wrote a poem called More Than This, and a book called More Than This that got a lot of social media play and notice because it's about it's not necessarily a characteristic poem because it's a poem with maybe fewer hijinks, and it's a sorrowful poem, but it talks about how beautiful the world can be if we look at it the right way. And there's a short poem called "Taking It Home to Jerome," which is about my writing
Hmm.
process. So those are you know, those are ones that actually might represent the Winter Dance Party better than the poem called the Winter Dance Party. But the Winter Dance Party is, I think that in those four words, kind of sum up a whole view because it's got dancing, the party, but then
Mhm.
that idea of winter, which is a little bit chilly. The cold temperatures are always out there. The shadows are always out there. So let us dance while we can.
Excellent. I'm going to ask you to read a poem. Um,
Okay.
it's one of my favorite poems in the book. It's called "Skinny Dipping" with Pat Nixon,
Oh, sure.
and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's on page 145.
Okay. And be happy to read it for you. I think it's a pretty characteristic poem in that uh, it's almost diary-like. Everything in it is something that happened to me. I don't know about you, but sometimes a student or somebody will say, "Well, I had this adventure where." I crossed the state line and found myself, running afoul of another law that I didn't know about, and the police took me in. I got out of it, and here's the poem I wrote about it. And the poem is about, oh, isn't life ironic and mysterious? And what happened to the story? This the story prompted but the story's better than the poem and the person telling of it. So I figure, heck, I'm just going to put the story in the poem to see what people think. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is the background of it is that Barbara and I went up to the National Book Festival in Washington uh, First Lady Laura Bush presided over that and brought in a bunch of luminaries and people like us as well. And so there was a wonderful ceremony, but it begins with a party that took place after the ceremony, and it includes a visit to the White House. Skinny dipping with Pat Nixon. The blonde kisses me and says, "Was that okay?" And I say, "Yeah, it was pretty nice, actually." And then she says she and her dark-haired friend are going to take their clothes off and jump in the pool. And if they do I want to join them? And I say, "Yeah, kind of. It's just that Barbara's in the next room and I'm in enough trouble already. We're at a party following the National Book Festival. And while nobody told me not to speak out against the war in Iraq, it's hard to pretend nothing is going on as surveillance helicopters whack whack over the poetry tent, and some of the peace marchers have plopped down in front of me. So I promised them, if elected, one, to bring the troops home, two, to rebuild the city of New Orleans exactly as it was before Hurricane Katrina, and three, to prevent or at least minimize helicopter flyovers during all future poetry readings. And now my host won't talk to me. And all because I put a single raisin of doubt on the government's snowy white cake of confidence. At the opening ceremony the night before, 4 writers spoke, but they all said the same thing, which is that if you work at it, keep smiling, everything will be fine. And then this morning at the White House itself, there were 4 more speakers, but these weren't even writers, because if you have too many writers at a book festival, people get the wrong idea. So there were 2 TV personalities and 2 basketball players, but they said the same thing. Life's good, people are good, God loves you. Yet every portrait in the White House is of a failure. Warren Harding with his gang of unscrupulous shysters, LBJ, who went overnight from world's greatest president to world's worst, even poor Eleanor Roosevelt with her unfaithful husband and ugly buck teeth. But the poet I come back to again and again is of Pat Nixon, so dignified, so sad, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes pained, her narrow chin almost trembling. "You weren't good enough for me when I was younger, Pat. I thought you scrawny and neurotic, and you were married to that evil turd, Richard. But now I'm the age you are in the portrait, and I can see how hard it was for you, how different it would have been if you'd had a good marriage, a good man. I would get in that pool with you, Pat Nixon, as the guests swirl unseeing. You'd turn your back to me and wriggle out of your old-fashioned white undies, then dive in and surface where I wait and throw your arms around my neck. I brush your hair out of your eyes and glance down at your breasts, though I'm too shy to touch them. The guests nibble gingered beef and crab-stuffed cherry tomatoes, and the host pours another drink, a stiff one this time. The sky over Washington fills with chrysanthemums, their light dappling the water in our pale skin as they flash and boom like bombs or fireworks, though we can't tell which. Kiss me, Pat. Heal me. Heal the world. You've never been more lovely. A little follow-up to that. As Barb and I were leaving the party, she said, "Did you see that um, shapely blonde woman in the provocative, skimpy dresses?" And no, I didn't notice her. And she said, she walked right up to me and kissed me on the mouth and asked me if I wanted to go skinny dipping. And I said, "What? The minx?" So yeah,
Should work that into the poem.
it was an equal opportunity skinny dip.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite poems, actually. And that's really the primary reason I asked you to read it, but because I just want to hear you read it. But actually, when I asked a few minutes ago about a quintessential David Kirby poem, I kind of thought of that one
Okay.
first because it does bring in a lot of the storytelling elements. And you mentioned Barbara, and you mentioned Barbara in quite a few
I
poems.
do. Yeah.
It what's it like being married to another poet?
I get asked that a lot, and I get asked actually I get asked three questions a lot when I give readings. This Q&A is one is why is there so much Europe in your poetry, and I say, well, my school has a very robust international program with campuses in London and Paris and Valencia and Florence, and I've tried to teach on as many of them as long as I can. I don't have much time to write when I'm in the States, but over there, life is easier and more relaxed. So, whatever's around me goes into the poems. And the same question uh, is about, why is Barbara so much in your poem? I say, well, she's right here, and as I say, what you see is what you get. I uh, I look at what's in front of me and figure out how to repackage it, and then they say, well, why do you use humor? And that's like uh, that's like everybody else speaks in adjectives, and I only use adverbs or something like that. It's part of the deal. It's part of the rhetoric. Let's use the whole thing, which brings me back to what you just asked me, and I've completely forgotten it. What was it? But
Just what's it like being married
yeah.
to?
Oh, what's it like being married? Yeah. Paradise, pretty much. I mean, that's really a marriage question rather than a poetry question because it's best if you get along and feel passionate about the person you live with and vice versa. But yeah, poetry is just kind of an extra there. She's I can see her right now. She's sitting in another room. She's actually reading Don Quixote and taking notes for some kind of project. So it's and I read my books and tell her, oh, have you ever heard of this poet? No, I never heard of him. So we're I don't know, we're constantly feeding and teaching each other, but you don't really notice it as long as you like to travel and talk and go to movies and go out to dinner together.
That's most important. Um, I guess in our conversation we've talked, we've mentioned, Richie Valens and Buddy Holly and
Yeah.
your poems. There's one in there where Elvis is a primary character
Yeah.
and then Chuck Berry is mentioned and Bob Dylan. There's a lot of musical influences. Like, how do you think to incorporate all those musicians into your work? It's unique in a way.
Well, what probably the least flattering way to put it is that I have a wealth of knowledge that's a mile wide and about an inch deep, and I have things and people and events in my poems and in my teaching, my ordinary conversation that I pretty much know nothing about, but I just want to use them in some kind of way. The A couple of weeks ago, I've been thinking about the band System of a Down, and I love that name. And I couldn't if you played 12 bars of their music and somebody else's, I couldn't pick it out. I've never heard a System of a Down song that I know of, but I decided I wanted to get a System of a Down T-shirt, and I couldn't find one, so I designed one and ordered it from uh, a country and a company. Now, when I walk across campus, young people say, "All right, System of a Down." I said, "Yeah, nothing better." I don't know who they are really. I just love the name and I like the T-shirt that I made. So, that's it's all just flying around. I think William Stafford, the poet William Stafford, said billions of dollars worth of ideas rush past us every day. And it's my job, it's my life as a poet to reach into that maelstrom, reach into that blizzard, and pull out what I can and put it together in a way that I hope appeals to somebody else.
Hmm. I think that's kind of a good segue into the other poem I wanted you to read. It's called actually it's a very long title, and it's on page 48 in the book. It's Everybody Loves Our Town, an oral history of grunge by Mark
Oh,
Yarn by David
okay.
Kirby.
Yeah. Yeah. What my side hustle is that I'm a music writer. About 15 years ago, if you're a poet, you live either in absolute obscurity or relative obscurity. And at some point, I got promoted from the absolute form to the relative. kind. So a few people knew what I was doing, and I was always being asked to write about poetry or pontificate about poetry, and that's fine. But it became a kind of monochrome diet after a while. I wanted to do something else. So I've always loved music. So I sort of reinvented myself as a music writer, and I actually, covered a lot of live shows. Mainly these days, I review music books for the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and people like that. And the I'd read this book by Mark Yarn, which is oral history. And I think all oral histories are good because you have people who are on the ground. They were there, they saw what was going on. You have a variety of voices. It's just like bit, chunk of different people reporting on a particular band or musician, or in this case, a scene, which was the one out in Washington, out of which came Nirvana, but out of which came a bunch of just kind of regular gigging guys. I think it's going to say it in the poem. We'll find out soon. That the where you can't really tell the difference between the band and the audience. So people living an arty life, without being Paul McCartney and Wings, without being Led Zeppelin or Rolling Stones. And I discovered this wonderful New Zealand poet, Hera Lindsay Bird, who wrote a, a, a poem in a book called um, Wild Geese by, okay, her name is Hera Lindsay Bird. She wrote a poem called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver by Hera Lindsay Bird. So she takes Mary Oliver's famous poem and does that with that. So I'm writing about a book called An Oral History of Grunge. But the title of the poem, as you said, is Everybody Loves Our Poem, An Oral History of Grunge by Mark Yarn by David Kirby. And as you can imagine, I had to jump through a couple of hoops to get the editor to post that right. He said, "Well, you don't need to put your name in the title." I said, "Well, my name is in it's part of the title." So, and it's by David Kirby. He said, "Yeah, I know that, but okay, just humor me, will you?" Grunge. It's fun to say it, though. Like everything that's fun, of course, you want to know why it's fun and how you can make it even more so, which is why I'm reading Everybody Loves Our Town, An Oral History of Grunge by Mark Yarm. According to whom, grunge came out of the Seattle area as part of that whole 2 or 3 jobs, one of which is your band thing. That was what high school would have been if there'd been no classes and everybody smoked pot. Although this isn't a review of or even a poem about that book, but a poem called Everybody Loves Our Town, An Oral History of Grunge by Mark Yarm by David Kirby, in that I have indeed read Mark Yarm's excellent book, but I'm also thinking my own thoughts and incorporating them as we poets do, beginning with the fact that in those days, people in their mid-20s were already old. You didn't have to play an instrument to be in a band, just own one. And when you got kicked out, you formed a revenge band. Nothing succeeded like excess. There's nothing funnier than a drunk naked guy if you're the drunk naked guy. Musicians were magnets for trouble and liked it that way. They'd break out in felonies or bandages or both. What is grunge, though? Complaining, really. But complaining set to a drop D tuning, meaning the bottom or E string on a guitar is tuned down a whole step so that the songs sound like dirges, like the rain in Seattle that falls 152 days of the year. In other words, the grunge bands wanted to mess with the corporate sound of the music they hated, though musicians have always done that. The young Bob Dylan adored brill-creamed teen idol Ricky Nelson, whose studio polish couldn't have been more different from Dylan's snarls. Just as a lot of grunge musicians say their first crushes were on stagey bands like Cheap Trick and Kiss, though the kids from Seattle liked to rough up the surface of their art, and by doing so, guess what? A lot of them achieved enormous success, meaning they took on their fair share of the problems all young rockers have. Pot turned to cocaine, cocaine turned to heroin. And the last half of Everybody Loves Our Town, An Oral History of Grunge by Mark Yarm is strewn with dirty needles, revolving door visits to rehab centers, and far too many young corpses. Jerry Cantrell of Alice in Chains said, I never had a whole lot of money and stuff, but when my mom passed away, I got a little money that she left to keep me jamming. So I just totally went crazy. I bought a bunch of amps, did a lot of drugs, and was an idiot. But fortunately, it turned out okay. That nutshell's the whole grunge scene right there. And it's why I came away from this book with a big smile on my face. A lot of it is like a gray day in Western Washington. You've been kicked out of yet another band, and your girlfriend is spending far too much time with the drummer from the Melvins or 7 Year Bitch or the Screaming Trees. In the end, this book made me want to be young, stupid, and lucky again. Mainly, it made me want to be that way. And that's why I wrote the poem called Everybody Loves Our Town, An Oral History of Grunge by Mark Yarn by David Kirby, because now you could feel that way.
That's great. As you were reading the poem, I was thinking about the grunge scene. It's like, and it's kind of hard to believe in a way that it's, the height of it was 34 years ago or
Yeah,
so. The never mind Nirvana's breakthrough came out in 1991,
right.
and you know,
Yeah.
and it's a long time ago. Those guys that you wrote about in the mid 20s are probably around 60, a lot of them now.
Right. And but somebody came up with something that I don't even know where they used words like branding and marketing back then, but they didn't call it feel bad music or Seattle area music. They called it grunge, which is
Mhm.
as I say, it's that word will never leave the dictionary, and I say thank God for it.
Yeah, it is a fun word. And then, there was a post grunge that was
Yeah,
popular for a
right.
while.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I love to dive into Wikipedia and find out about I mean, there are 150 hair splitting types of uh punk out there, like crust punk and thrash punk and metal punk, and just the people don't know anything about music, think there's something there might be something called punk, but not to the punkers. They know which tribe they belong to.
yeah, yeah. And there are a ton of them, hardcore and speedcore and all this other stuff
Yeah.
that I personally can't really tell apart, but I try. At least I try. Um, so I guess everybody who writes kind of has a process of writing. Do you have sort of a writing ritual? Like, do you have a desk that you write at or a certain time you like to
Never.
write?
No, no, I know people have that kind of sacramental, priestly setup in many places, and good for them as well. But I think I got started getting really serious about poetry when my two boys were young, and they were always sort of underfoot, and so I was at a kitchen table, kind of writing things down when I could, and I make my students keep something I call a bits journal, and half of them uh, do it anyway. They might not use that term, but I tell them, the secret of longevity in this business is just to accumulate tons of bits, little things that maybe a goofy thing a professor said in class, or something you overhear on the sidewalk, or a graffito you see in a bathroom stall, or a childhood memory, or just an image from somebody else's poem. And you just chunk these things and accumulate them, and you turn your bits into kits, and then you turn your kits into poems. And I, I read or heard somewhere that Walt Whitman did something like that. And if you know that it's not true, don't tell me, because it's too good a story, which is that he had a little coffer, or a little box of some kind, maybe something you would keep, personal effects in. And he would write things on a scrap of paper and put them in there. And then when he had, trouble putting the lid down, he would, pop them up, spread them out, and put them together and write poems. So, uh, to me, poetry is just a long process of accumulation, and then you look around and you say, no, I don't have any papers to grade, or I don't know, I kind of overdid it yesterday, did too much yard work, I'm just gonna kind of stick around the house. You say, well, I don't know, let me look at that bits journal, see what I can get out of that. So it's really just coming and going to that journal, and to completely mix my metaphors. I also tell my students that life or poetry, or both of them together, make your choices. It's best managed when it's 35 miles an hour, and I hold my elbow out the window and put my other hand on it. And sometimes you have to go up to 65 or 70, and sometimes you have to, pull over and stop. But for the most part, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, just go through about 35 miles an hour, and you'll get to where you want to go.
In terms of influences on your work? Is it what poets have influenced you the most, do you think?
One of these days I'm going to find one of those Saturdays when I've done too much yard work or don't have to grade papers, and write a fabulous essay. It's going to be astonishing, David. Just wait for it. Uh, on influence, which is something that I have a lot of feelings about, many of which are skeptical because I think a lot of people get it wrong and they say, well, I learned everything I know from T.S. Eliot or Allen Ginsberg. Uh, Another thing I have my students do is I have them write a soul, I call it a soul sibling paper. So it's like soul brother, soul sister, but it's just a relative of yours. And I make them write. I say find three people that you would regard as relatives, uh, and it says three poets on the syllabus. But when I talk to them about it in class, I say you can throw in an artist, or you can throw in a musician, or an aunt who used to tell great stories. But mainly poets, and tell why you think you're related to them. And I kind of look at my predecessors more that way. I mean, if I take a step back from what I write, it almost seems to me more like a play by Tom Stoppard, who's a 20th, 21st century playwright, or a novel by Henry Fielding, who was British and from the 18th century. So these are people that I kind of discovered later in life. It's like what I said before, you're doing something and then you find out that it's legitimate, and suddenly it goes up to the next level. So people like Stoppard and Fielding they are my brothers. And so is Little Richard. Jane Austen is my sister. I think my that kind of highfalutin, more academic, polite society voice in my poems, uh, comes from her. If I had to restrict it to poets, I would say William Blake, Walt Whitman, Allen Ginsberg. But there's just a whole bunch of different people out there that I that I connect with, that you connect with. My parents. My father was a philologist. He spoke a dozen languages. My mother was a farm girl who told stories. So influence is a big. I'm from South Louisiana. Influence isn't clear broth. Influence is gumbo. There's a bunch of stuff in there, and everybody's recipe is different.
Last question for you.
Sure.
What's next on the horizon for you? What are you working on next?
I'm looking over here. I have four kits. I go through my bits journal, and I put together four kits, and they're kind of snarling at me. I'm kind of giving them the finger because they're not really cooperating the way I want them to. But well, what did I say? 35 miles an hour. Oh, that's right, David. Remember your own advice that you give to students and other people. So I'm just going to work on those over the weekend, and some of them might speed up, and some I might have to come back to a year or two. But I'm really just kind of a poem a day guy. I'm uh I'm reviewing a book right now. Uh for the Washington Post on Sir Paul McCartney after Wings. Look at this mother. It's 769 pages long. I do a lot of my reading in the bathtub. Not this one because I can't hold it up for that long. I could use it as a doorstop or a defensive weapon. So I'm gonna take care of my uh, projects and work on those things. And I've got too many books and projects outlined to get to by the end of my days on this beautiful, brutal earth. But I'm going to take it a day at a time, and try to surprise myself.
Awesome. David Kirby, wonderful to talk to you, and look, hopefully see you at the book fair.
It's been a joy. I hope I see you there, and I hope I see everyone there. It's the best thing in the world. My buddy Billy Collins is giving he's going to have an interview at 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. I'm going to be there, and it's too infrequent, and there's too much to do. But it's there's no festival better on this earth than the Miami Book Fair.
It is. It's great. It's amazing. I go every year. David, thanks so much.
My
Appreciate it. It's good to
pleasure.
talk to you.